Here with us is Joanna Summerscales, creator of the ET Newsroom. She's going to tell us a little bit about herself and how she got into the field.
Okay. Well, I just have to say thank you to Daniel and Dustin for inviting me on. This is normally not the way round it goes. I'm normally interviewing other people. In fact, that's how I met Dustin, because he'd got some fabulous photographs of Billy Myers' work through various people like Wendell Stevens. And I, for one, am a Billy Myers supporter big time. And anyway, it was great. We had a couple of really good interviews showcasing these photographs. So anyway, that to me is amazing evidence. So a little bit about me for people who don't tend to know that I'm actually not English. British. I guess I'm British. I was born in Canada, so I'm a bit of a Canuck on the side. But I came to England when I was about 5 years old. So it's been a long time here. And I don't know, I've been one of those people who have had a curiosity about things for, I don't know, ever since I can remember. And so things like paranormal healing and wellness, I kind of got into the wellness thing. And I think it's because I have disability in my family, had that early on. And so alternative wellness. So I'm not talking about the allopathic, sort of system of medicine. So that expansive field took me into learning how to be a regression therapist, because I needed to address a lot of my own internal workings that I was having issues with, like we all do. This is just a human thing, but I like to be in charge of how I work the process, not through drugs or stuff like that. So then I would run workshops on healing. I did several courses with different people on meditation, crystal work, all the rest of that. And really, it was very interesting. But then through that, I also met some amazing people on the healing side, but who were also really expanded out in their thinking, the consciousness, the spirituality side. And then, of course, it embraced things like technology, and I'm talking about alternative technology, and things like, because that came with the UFO thing. And I met Sixto Paz Wells, who's a Peruvian lifelong contactee. And he's been not only on ship a couple of times, but actually, I think it's Ganymede, one of the moons of Jupiter that he's been on. And so his work is absolutely amazing. And one of my best friends, who's from Colombia, happens to be one of his best friends. So I have a couple of ancient old videos on my YouTube site, just with me across the kitchen table, not that you see me, talking to my friend Cecilia and Sixto Paz Wells, and she's kind of interpreting tries anyway. So is a lot of fun. But that really opened me up to a lot of things. And then I was used to do these meditation groups, and we used to convene at a lovely lady. She's long gone now. She was known as the Baroness Edme de Pauli, and she was one of those incredible human beings. She was just so expanded in her thinking, and because she came from that strata of life where there's a lot of impact made on society, she, through her own spiritual work and understanding of everything to do with UFOs and alternative medicine and technology, had a great influence on those other layers of society. So that was a wonderful. And we brought Sixto Paz Wells to give a talk at her house on occasion, which was in London. And then this was an interesting one. This is again a bit out of left field, I guess. I met Giorgio Bongiovanni, and he doesn't have it now, but he carried the stigmata for quite a long time, and I'd never seen that up close and personal. And that's a whole nother thing. I'm not religious, but I am deeply spiritual, and I don't align myself with any religious doctrine or dogma. But it was very interesting, because one of the things that was slightly on the paranormal side was Georgia was going to be staying for a little while in London and giving talks about his experiences and carrying the stigmata, which was, and you don't think about it, do you? It was actually, he said, really quite painful. And when he did quite a lot of traveling, he would have a nurse travel with him on some occasions, because the wounds, in the hands and forehead, and which were all you could see would sometimes begin to bleed, really, and it would be quite painful. So it was quite something to to witness, to see. And I think there aren't many people in the modern times who have carried that. I think Father Padre Pio in Italy did. I think he had the stigmata at one time. Anyway, that was just very interesting. But when we went to, my friend and I went to look at a little apartment that someone was going to just let him stay at. This is Giorgio, for a little while whilst he was here in London, or there in London. And when we went in, there was this smell, beautiful smell of roses. And both myself and my girlfriend commented on it. And I then later heard, I mean, it was like somebody had left some rose scent around or something, but apparently, and it was a paranormal thing, and it was being brought in by higher consciousness or powers, and sometimes people say it's associated with the Christ energy. I don't know if it is specifically, but it was just a very interesting thing because there were no roses around in the apartment or anything. So fascinating stuff. So anyway, that's a convoluted journey how I came up. So there's lots of things that fed into it. And then I also went to, with a beautiful German friend, to the Philippines for a couple of visits, both about a month or so in length, to meet psychic surgeons, observe that, and even have a session with one at one time. And that was really fascinating. And meet healers. And these people are extraordinary. The whole of the Philippines is one of the most extraordinary places. I haven't traveled extensively, but that energy there, it's a country of extremes in terms of spiritual energy. You have the incredibly, I mean, really high level spiritual awareness at one end of the frame, and then you have the sort of animal sacrifice and slightly voodooistic, I would call it, side at the other, and this whole range in between. So it was an amazing experience, and what beautiful people they are. And yeah, I've just finished writing that segment in a book I'm calling Vignettes of a Life, which is my life so far. And that segment took some writing because it was quite a long time ago. I had to go and pull out the old diaries and see if I could piece it together. So back then, sort of to bring me fully round to today, in 2011, I started the Amash Project. Most people have heard of me through the Amash Project, and it became quite well known quite quickly. Just that we weren't trying it, it just did. And I was working with somebody who was doing the shooting the video and that kind of stuff. And it was very interesting because I'll tell you what Amash stands for. It's Anomalous Mind Management Abductee Contactee Helpline. I still have the helpline number, which we can give out later if anybody wants. But what was interesting about that, so back in 2011, there weren't a lot of people in the UK who were interviewing people, giving people a platform, and people who were particularly around the UFO subject. So I was really looking at, because I come from a healing and health orientated background and counseling, I've done some bereavement counseling, that kind of thing. So I'm very interested in the well-being of the people with their experiences. And so I wanted to give people a safe place in which they could express themselves fully without any judgment or ridicule. And they could tell their story if they wanted on camera. Most eventually did. I mean, it was a process of gaining, them gaining the trust from me and all the rest of that. And eventually, I have to say, lots of people did come on camera with me. Some wouldn't, and I told their stories, and it's still the same today. There is still a degree of stigma about this whole subject. Although, with the American release of documents and the Nimitz release of information and more things going on, it's a bit of a dribble. It's not full on disclosure, but people are getting, the public are getting a little bit more familiar with the concept as a reality rather than something to punch bag at, though they still do that as well. So yeah, so then just to bring you absolutely up to date, so now the Amash Project became the ET Newsroom, And the reason for that is that the Amash project, isn't it funny, when you are on the right track, you often get attacked quite severely. And that was no different for me. And so I came away from the colleague I was working with, who, that wasn't being in integrity. Let's just leave it at that. And so I just knew that I had to cut that, and then I did keep the name the Amash Project for a little while, and then it got hacked absolutely horrendously, with porn pouring through it. And I had a friend at the time who said, I can rescue the content, but I have to do it right now and chuck it onto just a site, but you have to have a name. Just think of a name. So I'm afraid the ET newsroom is what came out of my mouth. It's sticking because I've done quite a bit under that banner now. So I've just been, over the last year, but the last 6 months perhaps, putting together a lot of the Amash archives as a series, because so much work was done in those earlier times since 2011. Sounds like it's 100 years ago, but actually it's not. And so I literally have just, I think I may have 1 or 2 interviews left to do from that era, but that's virtually done. And I'm just getting the ET Newsroom as a website up and running. It has been out there, but it's been revamped to accommodate all of this new material. So that should be up and out there in a month or so. So anyway, that's a kind of quick roundup of me. There's lots of detail in there, but you can ask me what comes from that for you guys.
Yeah. I saw that you're doing a series too with that guy who does the Dowsing rods. Can you tell me a little bit more about that guy?
Does the what? Sorry, Dustin.
Is it
I
the
think.
Dowsing rods?
Oh, the dowsing rods. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Can you tell me more
That's
about that guy? Yeah.
yeah. That's very interesting. So yes, one or two of the latest pieces that I've put up are from the Amash project. One is a forensic dowsing workshop, which was done in 2015. And then in the meantime, I met a gentleman called Peter Vincent, and he is an older gentleman. He's an archetypal British gent. He's got a lovely caricature nature to him. And we've got a trailer an intro that goes on the front of all the work I do with him, and it is a graphic, an animation, not a complex animation, just of this gentleman moving forward. And the outline was taken from a photograph of him, of which I have many of him on film during the dowsing. Now, what forensic dowsing is they really looking at the science behind, trying to pin down what it is we're actually looking at. Now, he really came into all of the dowsing thing. Now, what dowsing is this literally our bodies. It's not anything external. It's our bodies, your body. When you've got a pair of rods, and I don't know if people know what we mean by rods, but they call them L rods. And it's literally, you can take an old coat hanger, an old wire coat hanger, and just bend it into the shape of an L, hold the shorter stem, and 2 of them. And then if you have a question or you're looking for water divining, they call it divining. It's very common. I mean, the military have been using divining, dowsing for donkey's years. Oil people use it, but what these guys did, so the initial team were called the biolocation team, because they were also sensing through their biology. So it was at a location. So what was happening was that these guys, actually, there's a couple of books that I should have brought down to show you that these guys wrote, absolutely amazing, about the science. Now, this group, I'll come back to Peter Vincent as the dowsing detective, because the dowsing detective series is based around his particular work and him as a character, and because he's just absolutely brilliant. But I just want to give you a quick overview of the biolocation team, because all of these guys were science based. One of them is in fact a retired physicist. One is a KLM pilot, and then went into he's very science orientated and education orientated and management. So all of that structure, mental structure stuff. And the other one worked, who's sadly deceased, Jeff Crockford, worked at Harwell Labs, and he was also working with people at that time that he was brought in to work on these subtle energy levels, what was happening was that the VDU, your visual display unit, a lot of people in those earlier days were complaining. So we're talking probably the 90s. I mean, not a million years away, but were complaining about headaches and that kind of thing, and consequences of working for hours in your screen, at the screen. So he noticed that some people had crystals or black tourmaline, which absorbs the rays from that the screens give off on their computers, and they said it helps. So he wanted, being a scientist, he wanted to get to the bottom of what was really going on. He said the only people who seemed to be able to pin down what was actually going on were dowsers. He said, so I went off to learn dowsing, and before you knew it, he was on. So that was one part. That's how he got introduced to it, and then he formed this small group. Now these guys were not interested in UFOs or ETs, last thing in the world. So I always find it interesting when people then are brought into the ET fold, as it were, because what was happening was that these guys were doing really big, it's a bit like forbidden archaeology. They were going to places from Stonehenge to Glastonbury. These are in the UK. There were places in Wales, one of them is Welsh, and also in the southeast of England where I am. And so what they were discovering, and there was a group of them, sort of testing each other's work to see if they were right, was discovering information about the Druids and their connection with ET. I mean, I know this sounds absolutely crazy, and you won't probably hear this anywhere else apart from the work of these guys of the bilocation team, which has more or less essentially broken up, but sit with the demise of their kind of lead. And but their work was extensive, and not only that, what you're working a lot with the hologram of the thing you're dowsing. Now, this is really interesting, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize. Now, I'm going to take you straight to an experiment that I was involved in right at the beginning of this. I'm not a dowser. I've done a bit more dowsing since, but I wouldn't say I was particularly good, but I can sense things. So on this experiment, what Peter had done on this occasion was to create a communication stream, and I can tell you how that occurred if you like at some point, with a faction of ETs, and he asked them if it was possible for them to show themselves in a magnetic hologram form that could be tested. And when I say tested, I'm talking about being interrogated, so you could read, if you knew how to do the dowsing, the forensic dowsing well enough, you could get out the propulsion system, you could see how big the craft was, you could see what kind of creatures were on board, what kind of beings. They called them GILFs, different kinds of GILFs, which is galactic intelligent life forms. That's what GILFs stands for. They don't really like to use the word alien. They use exo consciousness or exo intelligence, but GILFs. Anyway, I think that's a great name. So what he did, and I wasn't alone, there were several of us on this occasion, and we were at this spot where Peter had arranged at a certain time, and I can't remember, it was like 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., something like that. Let's say it's that this craft would be on site. Now, we weren't having any visuals. This was purely magnetic energetics. So what that would be was that there would be a real craft, and it would be up somewhere a few miles, perhaps, situated where it normally travels, but it would be parked for the purposes of this arranged experiment above, where allowing us to read the magnetic field. And we stood around in this location where Peter had said it was going to park itself beforehand. And so what happens is you have the rods, and they are, let me just get some rods just to show you, because this is kind of interesting. And so several of us were stood around in this area, not quite like a field. So these are a couple of rods. I'll just show you what these look like. There you go. Can you see those? Cool. And all it would be when they cross, it's when you've got a field. I'm crossing those myself, but when they cross, otherwise, It's when you're interacting with a field, whatever it is you're interrogating. Otherwise, they tend to remain open, or they can swing around another way, and you can even do it with one. That's getting it off the ballpark a little bit, but let's go back to what was happening here. So we were there like 5 to 1, let's say 5 to 1 p.m. And here I was standing with my little rods like that, and there they were open. And all of a sudden, 1 o'clock comes, and oops, they crossed.
Whoa.
Now, what is happening? They're not forcing the rods to cross themselves. The frequency is not, but your body is. There are minute. This is well known and scientifically spoken of, and I'm sure written up. These, if you look at this Biolocation 2015 dowsing workshop that I put up, you should see, have a little bit more understanding. So I am not the expert, but I have been in these tests. And then, so the guys who were really au fait with all of this were reading the kind of propulsion system it had. Often there's uranium, there's titanium. Often they'll find polycarbonates as well, some very, very interesting materials, and often element 115. There is a video of Peter, and he is testing out this area, another area of land, which I was filming him do when we were looking for the elements of a craft which he believed and other people had picked up that was way. The physical craft may not be there, but the remnants of it, like the resonance of it, will be. Because unless you dig a place up, if the land is not disturbed, it will have the resonance of the frequency of whatever it is you're inquiring about. So very, very interesting. And then when 6 o'clock came, the cross rods just opened up and you knew they'd gone. And that was, in fact, I am, and if you guys want to be involved in this, you're very welcome. I'm just about to set up another experiment, but this time I want to take it, I want to do different experiments around the globe. So so we haven't done it with anybody else. The last one we did was with a wonderful man called Dan Brock, who was in Arizona University. And he did so this was obviously remote. Peter set up the experiment here in the UK for Hamel Park. I think it's Hamel Park in Arizona. And Dan was absolutely on board with the process. Obviously, we had a few meetings and chats about it, and he also was able to detect a lot of information and had the same exact experience where the rods crossed, and he was able to do it. And he's kind of a new dowser, and I've just heard from him today, and I said I would really like to do an experiment again. Can we do one with you in the Philippines? Let's see how that works. So I want to do another one in America, and I've talked to 1 or 2 people. Obviously, we can't have all these craft at the same time, so we'll have it, perhaps the same craft at different times, and do it in different countries as well. So maybe, Daniel, we can do one in Germany as well, and we then will log what people have got. I mean, even if you are not a very seasoned dowser, even if you can just go in and say, yes, I could pick up the field and step out. Yes, I can feel that the field is, I'm no longer in that field, just to get used to it. And it's a very, very interesting way. So these guys were so shocked and astonished when they found ET. And once they found ET, honestly, it was astonishing. There were so many stories and so many incredible occurrences that happened, and the ETs that they linked with were part of what they called the Federation. And the Federation is comprising 24 other bodies, planets, and beings who have a care of Earth and a stewardship in a way, making sure that the Earth is not decimated or intruded upon, let's say, as far as I understand. So there was a lot going on with that, and a lot of incredible communication. And when I first met Jeff Crockford, the lead, I had no idea what I was going to see. So again, when he died, he was in his early 80s. So when I met him, he was probably in his mid 70s, something like that. So there was this older gentleman, and I went off to, so on he's got a very small front lawn, and he'd got it pegged out. They sort of flag them out. They put these sticks in, little flag on, so you can see where you've got a response, and just peg it out. So there's a little one at the front, and I said, "Oh, what's that? That's interesting. It just looked an anomalous kind of thing." And he said, "Oh, that's probably 5 or 6 miles up, and yeah, that's just a small scout craft." I went, "Oh, okay." I mean, I had no idea. And then when we went into the front of the house, or the back of the house from where we were, he got quite a big lawn, and he said, "I've laid out the solar system." I went, "Oh, okay then." I thought, what is this? What is this? Anyway, honest to God, there is a way, a system, using the most simple of things to bring that hologram down onto the ground and walk around it. So you can represent it in kind of human size experiences. So, for example, he said, "Now this is the sun, and relevant to that, this is the Earth, and here's Jupiter, and here's this, and here's that." And he walked me round the solar system, and he got his role. I mean, honestly, it was. I wish I'd had a camera. I wish I could have recorded that. It didn't occur to me. I didn't, that was all new for me. I didn't know what I was. I didn't realize the privilege I was having
Wow.
seeing this. It really was a privilege. And then he said, "And look at this." And he got his rods, and they were crossing as he was walking through a certain part of the going toward the outside of the solar system into the galaxy. And he said, "Look at this." He said, "These guys," and what he was doing was following several craft. He said, "There's several craft coming in here, and I'm following them through. Following where they're going in the solar system, because he could polarize it right down from all those gazillions of miles across to a small focus where you could lay this out like a little map on his front garden." And it was just astonishing, because my analytical mind was playing havoc, going, "Yeah,
Right?
okay then."
It's
And
amazing
then
nonetheless. Yeah.
and then well, no, and then because these people are scientists. I'm not a scientist. And I have no right to dismiss what I'm seeing. I may not understand it, and so that just hooked me in, because these guys were not looking for UFOs. Couldn't have been further from being interested in UFOs, or even wanting to be associated with it. But they went where the evidence took them. They were evidence led, and they were astonished. They were astonished. They even ended up working
Dowsing
with
for ETs.
Dowsing for ETs. Yeah. Well, this series called the Dowsing Detectives, I'm looking to develop that in quite extensively, and we've got a huge catalogue of episodes that I want to do with Peter. For people who don't know, what Peter has been able to do is that when he started this, he's also again he comes at it. He's a painter. He's got a very good analytical mind as well. He worked sort of stock market stuff a long time ago, and so he's used to driving down the detail. And he's also an artist. And he began what he did. He realized that I'm trying to remember the point where he realized there were color codes. So basically, I can't remember that point of inception, so you'll have to excuse me for that for a second. But what he began doing was painting up barcodes. Now, what he would do, for instance, let's say he was looking for a crashed craft. So he asked his connection with ET, "Can you tell me then, is there a crash craft in my relatively local area?" Now he would get his answers using a pendulum, and let me just show you a pendulum, because you can never assume everybody knows what you're talking about. So you can get different ones. Here's a couple. There's a crystal one, and that's a little, I don't know, little lead weight one. And that's what they do. They spin one way for yes or the other way for no. Again, I'm not brilliant at doing this, but I have had quite a lot of results, you know, a lot of the time when I've been working. And I haven't got any color bars to show you in front of me, but we can, if you want to put those on later, I can show those. But so these are like barcodes, color barcodes, and they're unique identifiers. They're like an iris print, like a fingerprint. And so if we were, for example, wanting to code that this crashed craft, it too would have its own ID. And he found that he would use this code, then would become the code for crashed craft, or a general code for crashed craft, or a code for element 115. So basically anything that you can think of can be coded. So for example, there is we had a missing girl a while ago called Madeline McCann, many years ago now, little girl who went missing in Portugal. And Peter coded her, and she was never found. They said that her body's never been found, and said she, you know, she would be obviously not, what, perhaps dead, but as I said, body was never found. All very mysterious. So he coded her, and I watched him work with this code, and he did come across, let's say, frequencies that related to her code. Now, your code and my code, should Peter code us, would be entirely unique to us. So then, if you would find the code of a deceased person somewhere else and alive, I don't know if you can imagine why that could happen. Well, it could happen if there are organs in another person from the donor who is the deceased.
That's interesting
Person. We're working on a death of a local girl a couple of years ago to us. We're in the southeast, as I said, and we've done quite a lot of footage, but we just want to get some more details from relatives first before we put that out. And I followed Peter, filming him as he went along with the rods after he'd coded this particular person. Her name is Sabrina Gocher, and she died in 2019, August 2019. And anyway, so it was, you know, this is very interesting because basically there's very little that can be hidden, including ET. And so we have been able to follow a lot of ET development. So from the human side to, you know, sorting things out like, is there a Roman burial here? Was this a plague pit? For example, Peter was tested by the Natural History Museum in London. It's one of the biggest museums in the UK, along with one or two others. And they asked him and two other colleagues if they would be open to blind testing, and they all said yes. And so there was gas found somewhere, there was coal found somewhere, or golden gas, right? So somewhere in England, so they found those, no problem. And then the lady said, there is a bunker, like a silo, that was to do with the defences of London in the last war. Can you see if you can indicate where it is on a map? And they were all correct. And what's very interesting is that kind of ordnance comes up on uranium and that kind of matter. So it's a very, very, very powerful tool, And, you know, there is actually no limit to what you can go and test. So we're looking at some of the subjects that we've covered are things like the Amber Room, and you may or may not have heard of the Amber Room. It was a room where it was made up of amber, absolutely unique, glorious, and it was taken in the last war by the Nazis and sequestered somewhere. It's never been found. But Peter, we've done a little video on that. It's very interesting, for this reason. Not a lot of people give it value, though. But I think if they did, they would, see some very interesting results, because that's what the next step is to go and look at these places that have been located, like this Amber Room idea that Peter's come up with, and see if it's true. Let's see the validation of it. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because it requires a little bit of attention and some, not so much money, but a little bit of input. So there's lots of different things that he is able to detect from the composite elements of a crashed craft, UFO craft, to ETs. I mean, where he lives, it's very close to an area. It's called Calverley Grounds. I've done quite a lot of work there with him, because it has thrown up a ton of very interesting material, including ET burials and ET and human burials together. Very interesting.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you think, our history actually is very different to what we've been told. And certainly when you're working, you can't hide the truth of what the frequencies are. You can't mask them. So I think that's fascinating. So I'm doing this series called The Dowsing Detectives with Peter Vincent. He's my main character, and I basically film him and discuss with him how we can manage to find what it is we're finding, and the methodology, and what it is. He's got some petrified fossils, which they're not 40 or 50,000 years old, or even 100 or 200,000 years old. They're probably something like 20 million, and they resonate. They respond to ET types. So I mean, and some to human types. So we are a much older species than anybody's telling us, and we've had interaction with ET of incredibly I mean, that may not be new news for some people, but into our ancient past. We talked about millions of years ago. We're not talking about 5,000 or a few thousand.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that is an incredible thing. So if any of your listeners and anybody who listens to this would like to take part in this experiment, they can send me an email just saying experiment or dowsing detective experiment, and we'll put them on the list, because what we will do is do the same thing that I experienced when Peter arranged for this magnetic hologram to come down, or for this craft to be in place at a certain location. Obviously you need a piece of land. It might be a park like Dan had in Arizona, or a field that you can utilize for the time, hopefully not with too many dog walkers and stuff, so you can do the work. But basically, if anybody wants to do that, we can always do a community experiment Zoom, and Peter can talk to you about how best to do that. And it's pretty simple. You just need a pair of rods, and you don't even have to buy them. If you've got the metal coat hangers, you can make them yourself. So it's very interesting, and it's an interesting process of discovery, because I'm giving you some very basic material here, but some of the detail, especially the biolocation. There are 2 books for anybody who wants to read some of the science of it. There's about 250,000 words, 250,000 words in The Secret of the Stones by Jeff Crockford and Nigel Hughes. And that is their journey and the science behind it. And then they wrote The Phoenix Point, which also covers not quite so many words, but even more of their experiments. And it gives you a very different take on our human history. And the link with the ET, which is absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah. And speaking of books, you wrote a few books, and you said you're writing one right now.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
Can you tell us a few?
Yeah.
Tell us about
let me
your
put
books.
this one up. This is the most amazing story.
Oh,
Not because I
cool.
wrote it, because it's not my story, but I did write it. His name is Bill Brooks. There we go. His actual name is, he's given me permission to say now, is Mike Smith. The reason that we put Bill Brooks was because just as we were going to publication, and it's a self-publication book on Amazon, he got scared because that story is absolutely extraordinary, and I'll get to that in a minute. So he said, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this." And I thought, you know what? After 3.5 years of work, mate, this is going to be published. I'm not doing this for it to sit on it. No way. So I said, "Well, we'll change your name." That's what we did. So anyway, Bill Brooks came to me in 2012 after he'd had several heart attacks, a couple of strokes, and he thought he was at death's door. He's still hanging on in there, probably is at death's door now, sadly, but he's had another few strokes. But this guy's story, it's called 44, is the main part of the title for a reason. It says an ex-soldier's true story of lifelong encounters involving alien abduction, men in black, a serial killer, and persecution by the Freemasons. So there's a lot to unpack in that. I won't unpack all of that, but if you want to read it, you can. And I'm going to do the audio hopefully in the next month, so that should be available at some point. But he had spent, when he was 44, Bill comes from the UK. He's from an area called Stourbridge, one of the villages around there, and that's near Birmingham for anybody who wants to get a handle on the West Midlands, I guess. And it's also called the Black Country, from old with the smoke and stuff. But he is a guy who didn't believe in anything. He would have thought we were all, as he said to me, complete fruitcakes, talking about what we're talking about today. Back in the day when he was a youngster, he thought all of this ET stuff was nonsense. Anything paranormal or spiritual was nonsense. And, he was very hard-headed about that. And so that's probably why he took such a hit when this all was revealed to him as a truth. And what happened was that from the age of about 2, possibly 3, we're not quite sure, Bill has been abducted. And when he was about 5, he had an encounter experience, and we think they're probably the Nordics, which was not an abduction. It was just an encounter here on Earth. And it was about the ecology, which is interesting. He was only about 5. And then when he was about 10, he this is kind of, I tell you, just the prelude to this encounter. He began, so he's in an area. I've been to all the main areas that Bill's had major experiences. I like doing these field trips to feel for myself and to get the orientation geographically of how the land is, what that feels like, and to be there with the person that this has happened to. So we were in this field, and there were dog walkers, and there were buildings quite nearby. He said all of this was not there, in my day. And so Bill was born in 1950, so this would be about 1959, possibly 1960. He's not sure if he was 9 or 10 when this happened, but so he said, when I was there, this was a remote place, really. There wasn't the buildup of estates and things like that. And he said that there was the ground, the land was put to corn or to crop of some kind, and there were woods there. So, and there was a canal, a stream there with a little bridge over, and that bridge and the stream are still there, of course. But the land is now mowed and it's no longer to crop. But he said in his day, there was this crop, and his father was always telling him, don't lie down in the crop, because if the combine harvester comes, you get mowed over. Yeah. Anyway, but little Bill, being what he was, he never took any notice of anybody. So he did his own thing. So he's lying in the ground. Now, this guy seemed to have an incredible relationship with animals. They just seemed to come to him, wild animals or whatever. And it's interesting, some special people have that natural frequency or attribute that animals recognize, and he had that, and animals would come around him and play or scoot off when they saw him, and he would just lie down. He was, on this day, he was lying down in the crop, made himself a little circle, and then as he's lying, and he said, I was just looking at the clouds and looking at the shapes. He said this huge sphere. So when he said sphere, and I said, well, how big? I thought he was going to say about a foot. No, he said about 8 foot. I said, really? 8 foot? Big sphere above this little boy's head. Bill's a small guy, so he'd been probably a very small child. And he said it was spinning above him a good few feet, and it was spinning, rotating, and then another one, the same, came and joined that one, and they spun around each other and then zipped off. And he thought, what the heck? That's strange. He'd never seen that before. So he stood up and he found himself in a crop circle. Of course, we didn't know crop circles weren't spoken of in those days, but in the distance, and I've been to this very location, in the distance, there was this really weird craft or vehicle. And he thought, oh, that looks a little bit like Bluebird. Now, there was a guy in England at the time who was racing a craft, a speedboat, kind of. He was doing land and water speed racing on this thing called the Bluebird, and it was, you know, a bit of an aerodynamic shape, so it didn't look like your normal vehicles of the 1960s or 50s. So he thought, oh, his name was Donald Campbell. He said that looks like Donald Campbell's Bluebird. So it was completely nothing to him. He wasn't. So he just thought it was normal. And then he saw this family of four, he took them to be, because it looked like they were two adults and two youngsters, coming toward him. And they were clearly what we might now call Nordics. I haven't heard so much of Nordic families coming in as a group, you know, with kids. Anyway, they did. And they, I mean, I've just put, you know, there's a lot of, I've just done a documentary, which is not out there publicly at the moment, about Bill's experience. And when I can get that out there, I will. But it is absolutely amazing. And these guys actually asked him, this little kid, had he seen any reptiles? Now, he said, I can't remember if they said reptiles or reptilians. He said, I really don't remember. But this little guy was uneducated. He just didn't go to school. He was, you know, he was a nature child. He was from a very, very poor background. And, you know, people didn't bother too much about schooling in those days. So he was a wild child and just picking up his sister after school. And that was his life, and helping around the house. Anyway, so when these beings asked him if he'd seen any reptiles, he had no idea what they were talking about. But it was very peculiar that they even asked. And he just said no, because he knew that whole area like the back of his hand, because he used to go play, wander, and explore there just all the time. So then they asked him if oh yeah, I can't remember the chronology, but there was something like if that the Earth, they told him that the Earth was in trouble, and if he could help, would he? And this little 9 or 10-year-old, and he said, oh yeah, what do you want me to do? I mean, how sweet. And they said, you'll know at the time. Well, you know, he's 70, coming up 73, and who knows what that is. Maybe it's us talking about this, I don't know. But anyway, they then asked him if he would like a ride in his craft. I went, wow, and didn't you think that was a bit strange? Did you not think at all? He said, no, he said, I just seen whatever that film was with this guy who flies around the, you know, some sci-fi thing. He said, I just thought it was normal, which is great. So he had no fear. So what they did, they took him on board the craft, and the parents left him with the two kids. And they said to him, you do this as well. And what the kids were doing was moving these little balls or spheres with their mind. They were just floating and controlling them with their mental energy. And he said, oh, I can't do it. They said, yes, you can, you do it. And so he did do it. Now he'll tell you, I think they did it for me and made me feel like it was me doing it, because I can't do it now. But who knows, in that different atmosphere, in that different edge, clearly this guy, for whatever reason, has something about him, and maybe it's from previous lives. Who knows what it is? He doesn't know anything about that. But he then, the parents brought him into another area of the craft where there was a propulsion unit, and this propulsion unit, very interesting. So there was a porthole, a round porthole in the craft. This is what he remembered as this 9 or 10-year-old. And then there was this kind of stanchion, which had like a cloche on top of it, you know, like a rounded covering, perspex or glass. And inside looked what appeared to be something akin to like a child's spinning top toy. You know, the ones you press down and it spins. I don't know if you know what I mean. Anyway, so apparently the dad or the gentleman, whatever, was explaining to Mike about the propulsion system and how it operated. Now, he couldn't remember that at all. I mean, couldn't remember the detail of that at all. But he said what happened was, is began to spin, and as it began to disappear in the spinning, he said the craft shot off really fast. And he said then he could see Earth receding through the porthole. And they went on for a little while, and then apparently the lady, Nordic, said, I think we should, I think we have to take him back. I think we have to take him back now. And he said there seemed to be a little bit of concern in her voice. I don't know why. But anyway, they brought me back. Now, at the time that they brought him back, it was getting a long time for him picking up his little kid sister from school. That was his job, his big job. So he'd left a bike earlier on by a fence before he got into the field, went running off to get the bike. There was no bike. He thought, oh my God, I'm going to be late to pick up my sister. And then he turned around, and there were the Nordics again with his bike. I said, what were they doing with your bike? He said, I don't know. He said, but they just gave me my bike. Maybe they picked up his panic, and maybe they were going to take it and explore that. But when they saw his panic, they thought, oh no, this guy needs it more than we do. And that was it. And he didn't even look back. He didn't think anything of it. So, what an amazing experience. And then when he was 44, he had an incredible, so he was a musician at this time. He was a working, singing, jobbing musician, and he'd just come back from a gig. He'd got his young son in bed, and his partner was in bed. It was about 2 a.m. And anyway, I won't go into the details. People can read it if they want, but it's amazing. He basically had a download, and this download, the nearest thing I can equate it to is an NDE, a near-death experience, because his whole life was shown him like a movie, and every single detail of every abduction, every interaction with ET was shown him. And he was, to say he was blown away is just an understatement. He was fractured by that, because he didn't believe in this. So here's a guy who is rock solid. This is not true. This is, rubbish. And here he is, and he knows it for a truth, because he knows it. And also what had been happening in his life prior to this 44 time is that during several of these encounters and abductions, things had happened materially to stuff around him that was witnessed by other people that he was not conscious of. And it caused problems, because he didn't have a reference point for why something was like something that he had no knowledge of. It just appeared to be like that, and others would notice or had noticed. So how fascinating is that? So then when he had this download, there was a huge event called the Abingdon incident. And Abingdon is a place near Oxford in England, where he had, during one evening, he had this amazing experience where he was taken on board. He saw a cow being abducted. He had a really huge experience. But that experience was the one that stayed with him. All of these many others sort of faded away for the moment, because you have to imagine the context. Here is a guy, rootin' tootin', guy, and he doesn't believe in anything like this. Here he is. He doesn't know whether he's suddenly just come to Jesus, or whether he's having a nervous breakdown, or whether he's possessed. He doesn't know what's happened. He has no reference point at all. So he said, I became an alcoholic for 2 years, drank myself stupid. He thought, this will all go away. This can't be real. And then he said, you know what? I would have thought that I'd had a complete and utter mental breakdown had it not been for the fact that they continued. The abductions continued. And he was aware of it then. I mean, he didn't know what necessarily happened during, but he was aware when it was going to happen. He knew a lot of stuff. And it was an amazing story. And just to finish off on that book, one of the most incredible experiences was when he was in the army. And he had two major abduction experiences in the army. And this is in Germany, in Sennelager, Daniel, in Paderborn. And these experiences, one of them was a paranormal one, and that was witnessed by a colleague who I've also interviewed and had him on a radio show with Bill Brooks, Mike Smith as well, to corroborate the paranormal experience. He didn't know about the others because he wasn't with Mike then, but he had these unbelievable experiences. Now the base in Sennelager in Germany was also shared with, and you can't make this stuff up, I tell you, with the Americans, and they had Honest John rockets there, and the Americans worked underground, and they were linked with, guess where? Area 51.
Hmm. Oh, that's
I
crazy.
mean, wow. It's a huge story. It should be a film. It should be several films because there's just loads of filmic elements in there. So anyway, I've worked on the documentary over the last few months, and that will get out there at some point. And hopefully, it'll be a stepping stone to a major film because it is just beyond. And that's the reason I spent so long with him, because not only was I working full time at the time during the writing of this book, but there were occasions when Mike was retelling some of the story and we went over things time and time and time again. So I totally understood, and that he would repeat to me what the detail was. So I knew he was telling me the truth as far as he knew it, as he says, as far as I know it. He said there may be things I don't know, or things that have happened to me that have impacted me, that that provide a certain perspective, but I can only give you what I can give you. So sometimes he would be so wiped out or feel, or the energy of what we were talking about was so intense, it would also make him feel quite ill, and we would have to stop, and he'd have a few weeks in between. We could, the work we could pick up again, and because it was this is huge. I mean, any abduction is huge for anybody, but with Mike Smith, this was so all-encompassing. It sort of affected so much of his life, and a lot of it he didn't know about. He didn't realize until much later, and then he realized when he'd had problems, let's say, and maybe not psychological problems like a mental illness. I don't mean that at all, but there were odd things that would happen and he wouldn't understand why, because the basis of what had happened to him had caused him to react in the material life because of an abduction, and he just didn't know that. So he did have a few issues and problems to work through. I mean, Jesus, who wouldn't, right?
Yeah.
But it is an
Jeez.
amazing story. One of the most amazing stories I've heard. And he contacted me because I think he'd heard I can't remember if he'd heard my talk with a guy called Neil Stewart, who was ex-military, another English guy whose family had racked up 700 years in army service over the generations. Wow.
Yeah.
And he had also had, the family also seems to have been very much part of generational abductions and UFO interaction, and that was big as well. And bless him, Neil was invalided out of the army because he had, I think he was in Afghanistan at some point, he had stepped on a mine and it had caused some brain injury, but he was still amazing and still came on camera with me. So that's another amazing, people are so brave to come
Yeah.
forward and speak about their experiences, those that that it's real.
Yeah.
Absolutely extraordinary stuff. So it doesn't have to be the big story like Mike Smith's. Like that's why it's a book's worth. And I had to leave some stuff out of there because it was wow, it was a lot. I mean, it's massive as it is. It's really, really a big story. But there are some, when the website gets back up, the etnewsroom.com, there'll be a page on the book and there'll be some interviews. And I did a trailer for the documentary as well, so people can see that. I think the trailer's already out on my YouTube channel as well, so people can go and see a lot of relevant information to him and to that story. But so that's that really big book. And I also wrote a fun little book. This has nothing to do with ET. This is two girls going to France and Spain and driving for the first time a motorhome, small motorhome, but nevertheless a motorhome, and the kind of very dodgy things. And I'm vegetarian and my friend wasn't, and she said, you know what, I'm going to be a vegetarian just for the trip, because it's 2 months trip. And oh God, I've never laughed so much in my life. It's called Olives with Everything, or To Go to Spain and France. And we ended up, just because we had very limited facilities and it wasn't a really very good van we were driving. It was a bit down at heel, so lots of things didn't work, like the hob. We had to chuck everything in a little tiny oven. So I come up with these amazing recipes. And so each place we stopped at, it become like, Granada goulash or Barcelona, I don't know, pizza or something. So that's just a really fun book, just to document that time, and also give some travelers some really good location ideas for traveling to France and Spain, and some good recipes if you're doing a motorhome job. So, but yeah, and case notes. My case notes they've been in the pipeline for ages. I keep getting more and more stories coming through, and I keep thinking, right, I'll really get that book out there. And that's basically is going to be caseloads, the caseloads of, or files of Joanna Summerscales of the ET Newsroom, as was Amash, and some of the stories that have come in that I haven't recorded on camera. Not everybody wants to go on camera, but there's probably 100 or 2 or whatever I've got. So I'll put some of those in book form eventually as well. So yeah, there's a lot going on, as well as these projects like the Dowsing Detective and Eclectia, which I don't know whether you want to talk about something else, or you want me to reference that. You guys, I've been talking for so long. I'm going to have
No, that's all right. I was going to say, where can people find your books
Okay, well,
online?
both on Amazon, to be honest. They're not in any bookshops that I know, though if you went and pestered somebody, they might get them in.
Okay.
But yeah, so generally it's just Amazon, and yes, I'm not doing them from the website or anything. It's just a matter of just having the time to get some stuff out there, and whilst you're doing everything else. So
That's great.
We will put a link under the episode so people can go there and find your books. So let's stick to the abduction topic for a moment. I'm very interested in abduction stories, and it wasn't always the case. I didn't believe in the topic too much. Maybe 2 years back, I heard a lot of abduction stories in my other podcast, in my German podcast project, and I heard the craziest stories. And I didn't take them serious, to be honest, back then. But then I heard a lot of stories who got a lot of similarities. People told the same stories and they never met, and they from another country, stuff like that. And I heard, and especially one story left a big impression. And there was this young guy. He's not so young anymore now, but he's probably my age now. I'm 42. But when his journey started, he was a young guy from I don't recall. Let's say 6 or 7 years, I think. And his parents sent him outside to take the trash outside into the trash can. And then he told me, and this sounds a little bit funny at first. And then he told me, besides the trash can, he saw Santa Claus, and it wasn't even Christmas. And Santa Claus had a funny look on his face. He wasn't quite sure what was going on. He was a young boy. And Santa Claus lifted his arm up, and the boy looked where Santa pointed, and in the sky he saw a sphere, a ball of light, of energy, I don't know. And the ball separated into, I think, 2 or 3 balls, and they moved strangely, and then he ran inside. And that's where his journey started. And then he got visited every other night. And he said, at first it wasn't grays or some kind of aliens. At first it was, and he said, don't laugh, it was penguins. Penguins and owls and deers and it was standing around his bed and just watching him, staring at him with these big black eyes, strange black eyes. And since that day, he's afraid of horses because they have big black eyes. And he said, "Oh, when he sees a horse, he's afraid. He's frightened." And yeah, and the older he got, the more these, let's say, fairy tale creatures or penguins or whatever it was, it changed over the years. The older he got, the more it was gray aliens. And then he saw, when he was older, when he was an adult, he saw gray aliens standing around his bed. So I'm thinking they tried not to hurt his brain, his when he was just a kid. So they showed themselves as those fairy tale creatures or penguins, stuff that he liked maybe, or stuff that he isn't afraid of. And when he was older, it was gray aliens. Have you heard of a story like that before?
Not exactly that story, but similar. There's, deers and owls feature very frequently, and it's interesting too. It's like locations, like Mike. Again, just referencing him because somebody else told me this recently as well. That he used to go inside his closet, his wardrobe, and he didn't know why, but he knew he was waiting for them. And at the time, he shared a room with his little brother, and his brother would see him being taken. I mean, it was, and then he would get a little bit bored waiting in the closet, so he would start picking at the wood inside. Then, when his father saw it, he thought he was just being a bit of a vandal, and he locked the wardrobe. So then he would just wait on the windowsill, and they'd take him through the window, and his brother would see him again. And the interesting thing is that his brother, who's disabled, when Mike would come home from the army on leave, he would try and tell him what he'd seen. He'd get books out with stories about aliens and stuff like that. But because of Bill's mindset, I mean, whether they had switched him off so completely from such a young age, on purpose, so he could have this life experience of having these issues without understanding a context of alien abduction. I don't know. I don't know what that is, but yeah. So, and then somebody else that I spoke to recently rang me, and they were telling me that they thought that was a very interesting part of Bill's story, because Mike's story, because that's what happened to them. They also would be going in the closet, and that's really interesting. And then you hear on the other side, I'm just talking about the closet, thing at the moment, is that things would come out of the closet. So they're very clever at this interdimensional stuff. And when Bill was completely aware and cognizant of the fact that he was being taken, he would get a particular sensation and feeling. If they were coming on a particular time, he would know that. And on this one time, he was completely conscious as they took him. They levitated him. He didn't see anybody. There was nobody around that he could see at the time. But they took him, and they took him straight through part of the building, which was partially window and then partially brick, and out he went. And I said, "And how? Gosh, were you aware of any sensation?" He said, "Maybe a slight tingling, a slight coldness, but nothing otherwise." So isn't that fascinating? Because again, lots of people have spoken about being taken through solid objects, and the slight feeling of like a frisante, like a little electrical sensation as they go through that. And it's very interesting. You probably come across, probably the pair of you, how the paranormal seems to go hand in glove with this field as well. I don't know whether you have or you haven't.
Since
Okay.
Dustin, give me some space. Back off. Back off, Dustin. You tried to talk again. Do you see that? Tried to talk again.
Cheeky monkey.
Talk so much. He's a gobbledygook. So
Chatterbox.
He's a chatbox. He is.
Go ahead.
That's fine. I'm sorry. Yeah. No.
I totally
Okay,
forgot
I
what I was
go.
going to say now.
Since a lot of abduction stories sounds very strange and very science fiction-esque, I don't
Yes,
know.
they do.
How do you decide if you get a report? If you get a report in, how do you decide which report to take serious and which not? I think I can.
Well,
It's
you
hard,
know,
right?
yeah, and that's a good question, and it's very, very valid. And you know, I'm just going to preface this by telling you a little bit about a little bit of the background of Amash. And Amash had in 2013 a major TV company in the UK produced a documentary with me and other people that I had interviewed in the documentary called Confessions of an Alien Abductee. Absolutely horrible. Of course, they told me it wasn't going to be horrible, but it was horrible. And anyway, you know, we all learn our lessons. But since that time, so I would get quite a lot of hoax calls. That's the reason I'm telling you this. So, and normally the guys, mainly guys, now and again girls, who ring the helpline or the hotline, will start giggling and saying how they've been probed. I mean, just crazy, stupid stuff, and you know, so on. And if they start with, you know, sort of in a serious way or whatever, then I'll listen until, you know, maybe a second call, or maybe just a few minutes later they start, you know, they say, oh, actually, you know, it's clear that they're just lying and they're just having a joke. Why people do that, I have no idea, because most people who contact me who do have something serious that's happened to them that they want to share, get off their back, or to just have somebody listen to them, nearly everyone says, you know, this is such a crazy story. I never believed in anything like this. Often that comes into it. You're going to think I'm crazy. And I always say, well, that's a good one. You can try me because I've heard a lot of crazy, but it's not crazy. And they're very tentative. And then, of course, if they are the real deal, say like Mike Smith, I talked, you know, and the story develops and turns out, well, as big as Mike's story, that's unusual. But, you know, we have a few calls and I check, you know, you just use your own BS meter, and
Yeah.
you know, you have some questions that you ask and see if they're telling the same story or if there's any changes in anything, you know, at all. And it's not long before the hoaxer breaks down, or to be honest, the stories I've taken forward, they're not hoaxes. I would, you know, I get a bit cross with the hoaxes because it's just a waste of my time, even if it's 2 minutes. It's
Yeah.
it's a waste of, and it's, you know, and I did put a little video of myself just saying that these guys are just dicks and stop being dicks. You know, there's, you know, there's something else they need to do, like their homework or something like that.
That's true.
But it's a shame, really, because it is a very serious subject. It absolutely causes, for most people, a lot of trauma, and it causes trauma because it's nothing that they've ever thought about, encountered, and even if they've thought about it, didn't really believe it, you know, for them that anything could happen. And then there is the also great difficulty of them sharing it, because if you have something huge happen to you, you're going to tell your best friends or your friends and your family for some kind of comfort or some kind of confidence building back, and to give you, you know, a sense of security. When these people do that, whose story is true because they keep telling the same story, they've lost friends, family, businesses. I mean, daughters, sons. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people who come into that category, and a lot of well-known people that you know well now in the UFO field have had that very same experience. And marriages have broken up because, you know, when you have these experiences, and even talking about this stuff, if it's new for you, you're not the same again. You are not that closed, you know, that different kind of mindset as you once were, like Mike Smith. I mean, he says, if this hadn't happened to me and someone told me this story, I probably wouldn't believe them. I mean, he's honest, you know, and I understand that, but you know, things are strange, aren't they? And And our world is not what it seems. There's so many layers to it, and there's so many aspects of life and life forms. We are not the only ones. Hello, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that come in to impact us or others that have these massive effects. Whether it's just a sighting can cause a massive change in your basic psychology. I mean, it's happened to people I've spoken about, and they've not been taken, but it's so rocked their world that they've never been the same again, because they know what they saw, and
Yeah.
you know, sometimes has been witnesses to it, and you know, it's absolutely astonishing. And you know, this has an incredible impact on them as spiritual beings as well. And again, I'm not talking about the creed and dogma, though. If people come from a highly religious background, they will, you know, may find that very hard to deal with, and that's another trauma.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may know of the case of Chris Bledsoe from Carolina.
No.
You don't? Okay. Well, I'll just tell you a tiny little bit. But Chris had this life-changing, unbelievable experience where actually ET healed him from a life-threatening disease. But his family and where he's from were all fundamentalists, Christian fundamentalists. And of course they come, not of course, but they tend to come from this is demons, and get thee out of here, and do not come and speak to us ever again in their community and society if they hear you talking of such things. They are incredibly intolerant and have no frame of reference for it except the devil and the demons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, can you imagine what a trauma 5 years it took Chris from of living hell for his family, and then everything began to kind of smooth out and settle down, and things are still happening. Things are still happening, and some amazing, wonderful things have been happening. And now the Christian he is also of that same nature, but not as strongly as, say, some of his family or in-laws and that kind of thing. So, you know, until they had their own experience of seeing things with him, they you know, they would not agree to accepting his story. And how can you know somebody for 40 or 50 years, right? Know that they're of integrity, a good person, and they have this experience which they tell you about, and suddenly he's an outcast.
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't
There's a bit of logic here that we need to add.
Yeah, right. We talked to Kelvin Parker from the Pascagoula incident.
Yeah.
And when I talked to him, he was so believable. I believe him. I'm very skeptic when it comes to all these topics, but I don't think he's a liar. I believe him. And he sticks to his story for so many years. It changed a little bit over the course of the years, but he's very believable. Kelvin Parker is very believable. Also talked to somebody who was there at when the Ruwa, Zimbabwe UFO case happened. I talked to this young guy. I met him at a conference here in Germany, in Frankfurt, and he was there. And of course, he was a kid back then when these UFOs landed at the Ruwa, Zimbabwe, at the Ariel school in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. And I asked him what happened and how did it look like and how these guys look like and that came out of these objects. And he told me about it. And you look these guys in the eye and you know they're not lying. I don't know.
Exactly.
I wasn't there, but he's not lying.
Yeah. Well, if you have a look at my inauguration video of I had a meeting in 2011 on May 13th, I think, and it was the first Damash meeting, and so we got a few people together, some people who had been working in this field had got a few people together for the launch of this, and just a few people, and we just got them on camera and heard their stories. And one of the guys just began to cry, and it wasn't tears of sadness. It was, he said, really, to be honest, it's joy. It's given, you know, it opens people up to a lot of things, and it's overwhelming sometimes. And who do you speak to about that? Because I spoke to a young man recently who is a part American and living in the UK, and I haven't validated his story yet, but he said, I'm just shaking even telling you, but he had such an incredible story that, you know, he clearly has some issues around, I wouldn't say mental health exactly, but some trauma, PTSD, severe PTSD, because of an incident, which I won't go into until I validate the story, that happened in Afghanistan, which involved ET and a craft. And he said, so he'd been to several psychiatrists. Well, after the event, he had psych evaluations and all the rest of that and came out fine. And then since he was out of the army and sort of now currently, he is having issues, problems, and he's been to see a lot of psychiatrists. And I said, well, what do they say when you mention this subject? Because that's one of the reasons for the PTSD. And he says they just it's like, you know, you might as well be whistling in the wind. They can't go there. They're just not interested, and they don't have a sort of background. They're not interested in even, I guess, embracing the subject or allowing that it could be a truth. Because why would somebody like that lie? I mean, you know, why would they need to do that? It's a nonsense, you know, when you sort of start drilling down into how somebody's living their life and you know, what's come about as a result of their experiences and mentally, spiritually, emotionally, etc., and their family scenario, then, you know, that gives you a lot more context to make a decision, if you like, or your own judgment about the validity of what's being said. So anyway, there we go. Just a comment there about the psychiatrist, you know, not accepting the truth, you know, that this could be anything true. And I've heard that many times, you know, those people are of no help at all to abductees, unless they're a John Mack, and I don't know any John Macks around at the moment.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories is Travis Walton.
Oh, yes, it's
the
amazing.
fact that all the witnesses that saw it, the 6 others that he was with in that truck before he got blasted with that light, and then they all freaked out. And when they went to come back to go find him, he was gone. And then they ran to the police and told their story, and they thought that they murdered him. And then they had a search team out there for 5 days trying to find him until.
And what a trauma for the guys as well as Travis.
Exactly,
I mean,
right.
You know, they were being charged with murder at one point, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Wow.
And then all of them took lie detector tests and then passed. And
Yeah.
especially when Travis got back, he passed with flying colors. But again, with that story with what Daniel was saying with that how they maybe in that case he saw the gray aliens, Travis, and he was laying on that glass table. But when they left the room shortly after, another like human ET showed up. So I was wondering if maybe those grays kind of did something with his mind to make them see like he's a human, so he could calm down a little bit.
It's interesting, isn't it? I interviewed a really lovely elder gentleman called Nigel Wright, and his interviews are out on the YouTube channels as well, because obviously we can only speak about so much. But so I interviewed him because he was an investigator and also a journalist for paranormal. He's a retired gentleman now and not so well, but I think I just got his interviews in before he really retired from being around on commenting on this sort of stuff. But his story was quite interesting because even before I knew this, he was telling me that he had had an experience when he was only about 7 years old, and that probably would be gosh, I don't know, let's say late 70s, probably maybe early 60s, perhaps early 60s. I mean, plenty's happened, you know, these days, but this is just an interesting, you know, interesting thing to document. And he said that so they were quite poor as a family, and they just, in England, and people still do, go on holiday in caravans, and they'll tow their little mobile home, sometimes by car, or they'll go to a site where there are caravans, and there's a lot of them, and that sort of thing. But they towed their little caravan which they did, nearly every year. He was just this little boy, to this place in Dorset or Devon way, southwest of England, very beautiful spot. And he said it was in a field, and you could see a pylon, that carries the wires across, and a big field, and they were not too far from the sea, all of that. And so on this one night, there was a big old storm, rain lashing down. It's always very loud in those caravans because they're normally, metal. And the lights went out, and he was already in his bed, but he was a bit scared. So he was going to get up to go to his parents, but then he suddenly heard his parents. Now his dad wore glasses and needed to wear his glasses to see anything. It wasn't just for reading. So he could hear his father looking around for his glasses, and his mother shouting to him, quick, look at this, look out the window, look at this, there's something outside. And what she was describing, or did go on to describe, was a big cylindrical craft that had an appendage coming down that seemed to be hooking onto the electrical wires. And she was shouting to her husband, and he just couldn't. It was dark. The light had gone off, so they'd lost power. And so finally he found his glasses, but then she didn't see the craft. And then the next thing he says is, now the caravan door was locked, but suddenly the handle's going, and the door opened, and there were a couple of what we would call Nordics. And they said to the parents, we just want to talk to you and perhaps do a couple of tests. And they went to bring Nigel, the little boy, and the mum said, oh no, please don't take him. He said, no, it's all right, he can come, we'll just talk to him, we're just going to talk. And they did in fact do some tests. But what was very interesting is that they actually were quite conscious, but Nigel didn't have this memory back till 1997, nearly 40 years later. Or was it 30 or 40 years later, when he had a regression session, when something went on, and he wasn't thinking at all about ETs, but he had a regression session for some other reason, and out popped this memory, clear as day. And he was back there again. He just knew it for the truth that it was. And he went aboard, they both went aboard this craft, and there's details of that in the interview. And he has a memory of seeing his parents sort of kind of looked like they were almost like on a recliner, laughing and joking with this lady. And then the older gentleman was sitting with Nigel and talking to him, and he was talking also about his health. And they'd obviously done some tests and said, oh, it's all right, we've worked with you, but I just want you to know that your dad's having we're testing, we're here to do some tests, and this is very interesting. We're a medical unit, and we're testing for a particular gene to do with cancer, bowel cancer. And I hadn't heard this kind of thing before. I had heard health testing, but I hadn't heard that there were medical units particularly. But that's how they describe themselves, if I'm not remembering this incorrectly, to Nigel. Again, you can hear it on the interview. And they said, you're fine now. And at that time, his dad was fine, no health problems, but his dad would go on to die from bowel cancer at a certain time. And Nigel also nearly died with bowel cancer at a certain time. And he remembered that these people had spoken to him about this particular gene that had been passed from his father to him, about this and this medical scenario and investigation that the, I guess, Nordics were carrying out. Anyway, after a little while, they were escorted back to their van, and apparently nobody spoke about it again. I went, never? And he said, it's really weird. He said, because my mum and I spoke all the time about all kinds of things, and we never spoke about that. He said, when I remembered my dad had passed, but my mum was still alive, and I had remembered through the regression. I mean, it doesn't all come back through regression. Sometimes there's other triggers. Sometimes you can be washing up and ping, a memory comes in. And she said, yes. Yeah, it happened. It wasn't a dream. It was real. So,
interesting.
I mean, how extraordinary is that? I mean,
That's
and here is a good old boy, nice English gentleman. You know, I hadn't even known about that part of the story when I had asked him to interview, because I was interested in a lot of his paranormal and investigative things to do with cryptids and other things. So, and that's another story, the cryptid side of it, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to add another thing about something we talked before. You said, why would these people lie? And I agree with you, but I don't agree completely. Because people lie and keep up a lie for a very long time for the strangest reasons,
Yeah,
sometimes only to be center of attraction. And yeah,
I
it's
don't think this is something you want to have an attraction with. I must say, most people
I know.
have the real deal people have only experienced 99.5% of the time ridicule, being ostracized, and health problems, mental and otherwise, because they have not been valued for their story. They have not been heard. It's very hard. It is
Yeah.
very hard. And a lot of people get into older years before they feel they can tell their story again. I mean, Mike Smith was 20 years after the 44 age when he contacted me. And he did it really because he thought he was going to die any minute, and potentially he was, with the sort of health conditions that he'd had. And he just really, really wanted to chew the fat with this story, which, as it developed, got weirder and weirder. And sometimes, as we were speaking, the story developed. Now, it wasn't that he was lying. He said, as I am going through this and you're questioning me, and we went really in depth over those 3.5 years, things would ping back. It's like another layer would be released. And I think it was like a safety mechanism initially, so he wouldn't completely end up in a lunatic asylum.
Yeah.
Because it was a great stress. And, it's not only a great stress on the mind, that then goes into the body. And those stresses can come out, work themselves out in strokes, heart attacks, other health issues that are very serious and severe, and can play out in later life, and sometimes in not so much later life. So those things that we hold up, that's why it's much better if we can talk about these things, or if the experiencer can talk about these things. Whenever any of us have had any trauma to deal with, any difficulty, often it's quite difficult to hold it in because it hurts us. It really does affect our physiology as well as our mentality. And I think, sets you up for things down the road that are not good. So if we can be brave enough to share the story, and so many, and I agree with you, Daniel, it is difficult to know. And yes, I do say, well, why would they lie? But I'm saying that after I've spoken to people, when I hear people with astonishing stories, I don't speak to them once or twice. I normally speak to them quite a few times to really get the fine detail of the story, and to get some of their family background, to see what the context of which they're coming to me from, the context from which they're expressing their story from, to see if there is any possibility that I'm speaking to somebody who's a psychotic liar. It hasn't happened yet, but look, it can happen. Anything can happen. We can all be fooled, right?
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, honestly, hand on heart, that the majority, 99.5%, that have come to me, that I've taken their story further, either by way of interview, or even that hasn't gone to interview. It's taken a lot for them to come forward. And, it takes a lot for them to trust me too, because they don't know me. I'm often a stranger when they speak to me.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've just found my number on the internet, as has happened recently. Or
Yeah.
maybe they've seen this ridiculous Netflix playing of the documentary or mockumentary again. And that's got a lot of the hoaxers going. But, hey, good for them. They've obviously nothing better to do. So, yeah.
When I said that it was my intention to rip anybody's pants here, but I know people who sacrificed a lot to keep up a story from
What do you mean, a lie?
a lie, and
Oh,
everybody.
well, of
Yeah.
course, well, hey, gosh, what a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's all I can say. I don't know, Daniel. We just all have to go story by story on its merit. And there is no one size fits all. There is no pro forma invoice for this. There are a few tick boxes, but there aren't that many because we're all individuals and we're all coming at this from a different mental perspective and a different history. And it's not always easy, and the world is not necessarily very kind to people who are different.
Yeah.
Whether they look the
agree.
same, but they have a different story.
That's true.
Yeah.
So, we have to also be a little bit compassionate. And that's what I would say, I ask people to. And, even for those liars, I mean, how sad it is for them, eh? I mean, it pees me off that they waste my time. But as I said, I honestly, I can't, there's not even a handful. There's maybe 3, possibly.
Mhm.
And the phone calls, yes, they could hook me in for maybe a few minutes, and then they can't maintain it because I start going down the rabbit hole, and they don't know the answers. They don't know.
Mhm.
So it's but hey, bless them if that's how they get their kicks. They're leading a sad life, and I'm very sad for your people that who spend so much energy living the lie, because it is a lot of energy, to live a lie. And again, it's annoying and it's frustrating, but also they too in some way deserve our compassion, because what is that story behind that they need to do that? What is it that they're not feeling enough in themselves that they have to do that?
Mhm.
Right.
But I hear you. Yeah, sure.
No.
And listen, I have I also don't take any prisoners. If people get on the wrong side of me and they've been taking the Michael, then they'll get short shrift and a tongue lashing. But
Yes.
I don't appreciate it, because this is serious, and it affects
Yeah.
people's lives deeply, completely, irrevocably, in every single way possible, and often in health
Yeah.
Mhm.
as well.
No.
Down the line. So, but and it's very interesting. I'm going to show you this. This is and I'm going to show you this for a reason. Eclectia
Oh,
is an
yeah.
album I produced a few years ago, but I'm actually just about to start working on it again. This
I was
is
going to ask you about that.
this guy here. Let me just point him out. There he is. I can never on the camera. This is hang on, get the light off it. Daniel Vallely. I'll put the links to the website on afterwards, or you can do that to the Eclectia website as well. And the album Eclectia was born because I'd had a dream to bring together musicians. I'd heard a lot over the years about, a lot of creative people, like musicians, having had experiences. And I thought, God, wouldn't that be just the most neatest thing to do, to create an album? And so it came to pass. I met somebody who contacted me. They wanted to volunteer to just help develop, the ET newsroom in their way, just on an ad hoc basis. And then I found out that they were a singer, songwriter, and musician. And I said, "Oh, hey, I've got this idea. Do you fancy bringing it to life with me?" And they did. And so Eclectia was born, and we've got 19 tracks on there. And some of them, so it's an international compilation track. We've got the UK, US, and Canada represented on there. And I've already created, again, 10 episodes of the British documentary, because this should be a documentary, because everybody's story, even if it's small compared to some of the others on the album, is extraordinary. Now, I don't know whether I can see Steve Boucher on here. Steve Boucher, he's a Canadian guy. I can't just point him out without getting the better light on it. But Steve Boucher is, when he was in his teens, again, he's an older guy now. He was part of a band, Harmony, and they had just done a gig, and they were on their way home, and they'd given this guy that they didn't know a lift. Now, whether he was part of this scenario that I'm about to unfold, who knows? But this story, and Steve is a musician, he's a wind player, and he writes his own songs as well. And they had, the whole band was taken. And there's a UFO in the road, unbelievable story. And Steve has told this story time and again, and I'm hoping I'm going to interview him again properly, fully, because I can't get to Canada at the moment, and or America, so I'm going to interview those guys I was waiting till I could do, but anyway, so I'm going to interview them, do a Zoom interview with them for them to tell their story. And Steve's is an incredible story about how the whole band was taken. These 5 people were taken, en masse, and at the little ET, and it was a grey alien. But whether this guy, this stranger who was also part of the group that was taken, was somehow, I don't know, manipulated to bring them a certain way, who knows what, but it is a really strange story. So we've got some of the most incredible stories. And one of the UK stories is a guy called Gary Williams, and I love his song. It's called Big White Triangle, because Daniel, his was a white triangle that he saw. And he saw this over a town near London, and he didn't believe in anything. And it's interesting because he's got a psychology degree, and he didn't believe in this kind of thing at all. And he and his mate went outside of a house to have a cigarette or whatever. And he goes to his friend, "Oh, look at that. Oh my God. Oh my God." And they're watching this massive big triangle go lazily over their property. And he said it was massive. And that triangle completely changed that guy's life. And from that time on, he just knew it was real, that this stuff was real. He didn't think it was, humans. He thought he was of the mindset that it was alien technology or other intelligences technology. And I know people say a lot of triangles can be our technology, and maybe that's true as well. I know that surely that we do have technology, no doubt about that. But there are times when it's definitely not ours. And so, you've got these fantastic stories and amazing songs. And on the album as well, I got most of the guys and girls to do a sound bite, like a minute in length. So it's vocal, voice, and song. And sometimes just before, for those who've done it, just before their song, we've got this moment of them sharing what it was, the kernel of their experience that totally changed their life. So it's really amazing. And then one of the Americans that we've got is a wonderful guy called John Martin. And John is a classical guitarist, which is interesting because the genre of the album musically, well, there isn't a genre musically. The genre is in the person, i.e. they're all experiences of some kind. So that's pretty funky. So of course it's a bit more of a difficult album to market because it's not jazz, it's not blues, it's not metal. Yeah. It's a combination of all these fantastic people's talent. And John Martin was telling us, in fact, he allowed me to read out a private letter that he'd sent to Jimmy Carter, because he actually used to play guitar for Jimmy Carter on occasion. And he'd written in this letter, and I asked him to let me read it as part of the album, because it was the most incredible description of these craft that began coming over John's property in, I don't know, it's Georgia. Anyway, I have to look that up. But anyway, and one of the reasons that these craft began coming over to his property was because John began an experiment, and the experiment was to telepathically try and connect with the brothers of light, the positive ETs, whatever you want to call those guys and girls, and he would play for them. And then he'd play on his guitar, and then he went a step further and did the whole thing telepathically. So he would go out and he wouldn't even have his guitar. He would be in his mind playing his guitar, sending those frequencies and vibes over to him. And if you look on John Martin's page, Facebook page, I can't think where else it is, there are these heart-shaped clouds, and that's what these guys used to leave the next day or whenever you could see these beautiful, like a moniker, like a signature, beautiful heart-shaped clouds. And they're definitely heart-shaped. They're not, they're not just a squiggle in the sky. They're definite heart-shaped clouds. And he takes it as acknowledgement of them. And then he said, and then the mothership came. Wow. Wow. So
I checked out that album. It's actually really awesome.
Oh,
in fact,
thank
it's all
you.
different people and different genres. It is really cool.
It is different genres, and
I like that. No, it's really cool.
Yeah, and I can't wait for people to have an opportunity to. I don't have any of the physical album available. It's all on Bandcamp, Spotify, Deezer, iTunes, all that. But look what that clever guy did. This is Dan Valley's work. I don't know whether you can see that.
Oh, cool.
Aren't they beautiful? I mean, I think
it's
I
really
want
cool.
this album just as a piece of artwork, but I want to do, you know, volume 2. This is just volume 1. But we want to get it out into the world. And this year is my year to push on. I'm continuing with all the other work I'm doing, continuing with doing episodes of the Dowsing Detective and some other interviews I've got coming up. But essentially, it's going to be an eclectic year. So if you guys have any ideas or would like to get involved in any way in getting this out there,
say, me
please
and
let me know.
Daniel are both musicians ourselves, so
Oh,
it's
are
kind
you?
of funny. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, the idea is because this is so huge. You know, there's stories. Here's this compilation of different music, and we've got I wrote a musical called Fifth Dimension some many years back, and I got somebody to I did the lyrics, and we had some rough music written. So, but there's a couple of my tracks on there. It's not my music, but it's my my concept and idea, and also Daniel Vallely, who did all the artwork for the album. He's a Beatles fan. So when I was doing my little drawing, you know, and I come from a lot of administration and putting things together very perhaps analytically, and although I'm an art lover, I'm not an artist. I can't draw, but I know it when I see it. So when he saw my stuff, because he used to live near me, he's a Scottish guy now back in Scotland, and he said, "Oh my God, Joanne, you have to let me have a go, because this is rubbish what you're doing." Nothing like having a friend tell you the truth, right? But isn't that brilliant what he came up with?
No, that's great.
Looks great.
So you can see we've got George Noory on there. We've got Jimmy Church even.
Yeah.
We've
I like how it's got
that
that Beatles feel to it.
Yeah, well, yeah. He said I based it on that.
That's
and
great.
Of course, I think it's a bit of genius. And on the back end, we've just got Extraterrestrial Highway Lane 1 and 2, and there's all the album names. And as I say, there is a website. It's the etnewsroom.wix.com, and it's eclectic release.
That's awesome.
All one word. So it's it's really good fun.
You might have to get Michael Horn on your volume 2, because he plays guitar and sings.
Oh, fantastic! Well, you know, I just need to get this into the public domain now and get the concept going, because I think now is the time. And sadly, my associate here, I'm just going to point to the guy who's holding his chin there. That's Dougie Deganin, lovely guy. He was the one who came and volunteered his services just because he loved the whole concept of the thing, and also he was an experiencer of kinds. He has an amazing thing to tell, absolutely extraordinary story to tell, which is very beautiful for humanity, as do they nearly all have some positive message about humanity, and it's basically to do with love. But just getting back to Dougie, Dougie and I would, so Dougie, so I was the producer. I got the whole thing together, and Dougie brought in 1 or 2 of the musos, and we got Merrill Fankhauser. Do you guys know Merrill Fankhauser? He's the American. They say he's the father of surf rock. I'm not such a musician, so I didn't even know there was such a thing as surf rock. That's how out of touch I am. But when I heard the song Wipeout, I didn't know the title. I didn't recognize it, but I knew it. The moment I heard it, I knew it. Well, I'd interviewed Merrill on the Amash Files podcast some years back, and then I got hold of him, and he was so excited about the album. So Merrill's going to be heading up again whatever we do with the album, because you know he had quite some experiences, and he had a sighting himself, and he's, you know, it's lovely to have the enthusiasm and to give these guys a platform. Can you imagine? I mean, what an exciting thing to have an album with all these guys on. And I think it's you know, a world first, because although people have done UFO songs and stuff like that, no one's brought these people together on one album. And there's a brilliant book called Alien Rock, and if you haven't got that, you have to get it. And this guy, Michael Luckman, sadly he passed on. There was volume 2 coming from him, but it didn't ever make it because he sadly left us. But it's talking about all of these people, including The Who, Elvis, all these people who'd had UFO or ET experiences, and you can't get your head around how many of these musos have. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. So I do have 1 or 2 people already in the wings who want to be part of it, but I just need to make this happen first. So, you know, we need to get it needs to be a documentary, because every one of those stories is amazing. And I mean, one of the people that I interviewed when we did Amash in America, was Devara Thunderbeat, or Devara Thunderbeat, and she's in Sedona. And she, I mean, her story is absolutely astonishing. She was taken when she was a little girl. There was a UFO hoiking her up, and her mother comes running out after her and grabs her, and so they're both taken up. I mean, honestly, you couldn't make this stuff up. It is an amazing story. And her mother's, her mother, they were conscious of it, and they mandated little Deborah to use music. They told her that she was going to have a life of making music, and that she was to use healing vibrations and frequencies in her music, which is what she does. Isn't that wonderful? So it's a great story, and she's still doing that now. So she's also out there on the Amash in America, part of the Amash archive series on the YouTube channel, if you want to have a little look at that. But I'll be interviewing Devara again just to see what's updated in her life as well, for the album's sake. So it's really exciting. So as I said, it's out there on all the usual platforms, and it's an exciting thing. But what I hope is that we can really develop this, and so that we can have the physical album for sale. I know it's not such a done thing now. I know people are going to streaming and all the rest of that, but I just think as a piece of artwork, it's lovely.
Yeah,
but maybe that's me being a little bit old-fashioned, I don't know, but I just love the beauty of it. And it's like they're collecting vinyls these days again, aren't they? Or at least they are in the UK somewhere. And I'd love to do a couple of vinyls of this, like as a limited edition, just for fun, so people could just have it on the wall, let alone try and play it. So there, this subject area, it lends itself to a lot of different potentials to just sharing the information and the knowledge out there in all kinds of ways. And I think, who doesn't love music? I mean, one or two people don't love music, okay. But mostly people love some kind of music. And the reason, one of the things, just to wrap up with the Eclectia album, is that Chris Bledsoe, whom I mentioned a bit earlier, is having these incredible experiences, and there are interviews out there with him, and I hope to interview myself as well, because he did a little piece for me, and I had the most horrific. Isn't it interesting? Every time I hit something really interesting, really big, I get technical problems. It's like it goes with the territory. And I had that with Chris. I still put the audio on. It was just audio, of course, it's the album. But he was telling me about this incredible experience he had. So they're great aliens, and they introduced him to this woman he called the Guardian. And now this woman, I don't know, people say it could be like Mary Magdalene. I don't know, an iconic female who has humanity's goodwill at heart and healing at heart. And she said to Chris, the message is in the music. And, that was, wow. I just thought, wow, him saying that on my album. And he was pulled in by Grant Cameron. Do you guys know Grant Cameron? You do? You don't? No. Grant Cameron, you need to talk to Grant Cameron. He's an amazing, amazing researcher. He's not an experiencer. He's a guy who has done a ton of research. His website is something like White House UFOs, or at least it used to be, because he spent 30 years exploring, investigating, cataloging what the presidents knew. So he did every FOIA you could on getting every bit of paper linked to what any president could have known about UFOs over the years. So then in 2012, he himself had an epiphany that it's not about the nuts and bolts, it's about consciousness. So now he's off on that, and he's written a book called The Paranormal World of Music, or something like that, which, I mean, he's also on the album giving a little bit of a talk. But what this lady had also said to Chris Bledsoe about Grant was, you need to tell him to listen to Kashmir and Neil Diamond's After the Gold Rush, I think it was. Not Neil Diamond, Neil Young, sorry. And so he's speaking to Grant. This is just such a sweet part of the story. And Grant goes, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm not interested in music. My family are musicians or interested in music. I'm not. I don't even play anything. I don't even listen to music. So look, this isn't for me. And this message must be for somebody else. And then he said, but when Chris mentioned the the singer Neil Young. It hooked Grant in because Grant is from Winnipeg, and he said not even Canadians know about Winnipeg. He's so funny. And so Neil Young is from Winnipeg. And so he had to listen to Led Zeppelin's Kashmir. And then he had to listen to Neil Young's, I think it was after the gold rush, something like that. And they're talking about these he's talking about craft, and he's talking about this, and that opened in Grant a huge awareness about musicians, and so on and so on and so on, like a pebble in a pond spreading out. And this came from the ETs. This came from this lady, this guardian, who is some higher spiritual being, obviously, that has some overarching link with the ET stuff. I don't know the detail of that. So it's really exciting. So this album is a compilation of some really amazing stuff with some really extraordinary people, as I said, from the UK, Canada, and the USA.
So I recommend people checking that out.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. It's on, as I said, it's on Bandcamp and all those other cool things. But yeah, you guys.
We can actually have you back again because you have so many stories, and I think it would be really cool, and it'd probably be an awesome surprise for you. We'll have you join us with Michael Horn.
Oh, that would be lovely.
We'll have a 4-way talk, and maybe you can ask him some questions that you might have, or
yeah, super.
Can maybe help find some subject matter, because me and Daniel are kind of we're trying to figure out what to ask him, because we feel like we kind of asked him a lot of stuff already. So we like to have other people's input. So maybe we could schedule another day with you and him together.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody wants to know more about the projects I'm working on, or anybody in the UK or elsewhere, is interested in becoming part of what I'm working on, like Dougie did. I didn't just finish. I will just finish. I didn't finish the Dougie story. He did all the tech, and I'll just let you go in a second, Dustin. I know you're dying.
I'm like dying here. That's right.
But anyway, just quickly to finish it up. But he was very, very poorly, and although we'd done 1 or 2 healing sessions, and they'd been really beneficial and really effective, and then so we finished the album. We released it on the 30th of November 2018, and he said during that sort of time, sort of within that month, he said, "Oh my God, it's the first time I can listen to the album in complete joy," he said, "without my tech head on. I'm not listening for the levels. I'm not listening for whatever." And he said, "I absolutely love having been part of this. It's so amazing. Thank you so much." And then, how rude, he went and died. He was just about to go. He said, "I can't wait to come back in the new year, start on all the PR stuff." So that's really one of the reasons that it got parked, because poor Dougie left us very suddenly he went into a coma on Christmas Day, and went on January 1st, I think, then 2019. Anyway, so it really was a big shock and rocked my boat quite a bit. And, anyway, but how amazing that he was part of that. But that was just willpower and having a vision, and we now need some help to move that further into the music world. So if any of you guys know anybody, or know anybody who can do that, then give me a shout, and if not, then I shall let you know how I progress. And it's going to be exciting, because there will be volume 2, but we'll get volume 1 out there in a fun way as well. So, and hopefully we'll get to the documentary and all the rest of that good stuff, because it is so fascinating.